The arrival on the barren moon. The moon hung in the distance, a lonely orb of grey and dust, bathed in the feeble light of a distant sun. To most, it was just another lifeless rock in the vastness of space, but to Maddox it was a job site, a desolate junkyard filled with the remnants of ancient technology and forgotten stories. He stepped off his ship, feeling the crunch of powdered dirt beneath his boots, and scanned the horizon. Ahead lay a massive hunk of twisted metal, half buried in the ground, its surface battered and scarred from countless storms. This was no ordinary repair job. Maddox adjusted the heavy toolkit slung over his shoulder and made his way toward the wreckage. As he approached, he spotted her, Cethia, the alien pilot. She stood tall and imposing, her sand-beige skin illuminated by the faint glow of fluorescent green cracks that ran across her body, pulsating gently like the heartbeat of a long-forgotten machine. Maddox wiped sweat from his brow, more from the tension than the heat, and cleared his throat. "Hey there," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're late," Cethia replied, her tone clipped yet fluent in human basic. Her eyes narrowed, betraying her impatience. Maddox shrugged nonchalantly, dropping his toolkit to the ground. "You're lucky I even showed up. I've seen better days in junkyards like this." As he knelt beside her ship, he couldn't help but notice the layers of disassembled parts scattered around like discarded dreams. "So, what's the story?" he asked, his hands already inspecting the damage. Cethia crossed her arms, her posture tense. "I need this thing flying fast," she said, her voice filled with urgency. Maddox leaned closer to the open panel, examining the intricate systems. "I fix ships, not miracles. This thing looks like it's ready for the scrap heap." He gestured to the ship's battered hull and the flickering lights within. Cethia's gaze hardened, reflecting her determination. "It's not just a ship," she said, her voice low. "It's my family's legacy, and there's something inside that Crake wants." Maddox raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And who's Crake?" "A mercenary," Cethia replied, her eyes flashing with anger. "He thinks he can use what's inside this shit for his own ends. He's dangerous, Maddox." "Sounds like a fun day at work," he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. "You know, I typically charge extra for encounters with mercenaries." Cethia's expression softened for a moment. "I don't have time for jokes. We have 2 days before Craig finds us." Maddox sighed, contemplating the magnitude of the task ahead. 2 days. I'd be impressed if I could get the lights on in that time. "You don't have a choice," she pressed, stepping closer. The intensity of her glowing eyes made him feel like she was reading his thoughts. "Neither of us do." With a reluctant nod, Maddox crouched back down, tools in hand. "All right, let's start with the basics," he said, rolling up his sleeves. The hours melted away as they worked in tandem. Maddox's hands moved deftly over the ship's components, repairing what could be salvaged and replacing what couldn't. The air filled with the sounds of crackling wires and the hiss of soldering. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Cethia than met the eye. Her focus was unyielding, her movements precise, as if she understood the shit on a level that he couldn't comprehend. After what felt like an eternity, Maddox leaned back, wiping grime off his forehead. "You've got quite a piece of machinery here," he said, casting a sideways glance at Cethia. "How did you come by it?" "It's a long story," she replied, not breaking her concentration. "An inherited family ship, passed down through generations." "Must be quite the family," Maddox mused, his curiosity piqued. But he didn't press further. He sensed that she was not one to share her past lightly. As night fell, or what passed for night on this moon, the sky remained a dull grey, with distant stars barely visible through the haze of space dust. Maddox stretched his aching muscles and glanced over at Cethia, who stood rigidly, her luminous skin glowing faintly in the dim light. "You should rest," he suggested, leaning against the ship. "I don't sleep," she replied flatly. "Right. Alien physiology," Maddox said, chuckling softly. "Or just a bad habit." Cethia shot him a look that was equal parts annoyance and intrigue. Yet, for a fleeting moment, the corner of her lips twitched, hinting at a smile. "Keep working, human," she said, her tone lightening ever so slightly. Maddox grinned. All right, but if we get out of this alive, I expect to drink at least." She didn't respond, but the way she looked at him then, her expression softening, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to understand each other. "Why help me?" Cethia asked suddenly, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. Maddox shrugged, turning back to his work. "It's what I do. Besides, I've been in worse places than this. Figured I'd see if I can make a difference for once." A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then, after a moment, Cethia sighed softly. "You might regret that." "Maybe," he replied with a grin, "but not yet." The ship hummed under his hands, slowly coming to life as Maddox worked through the night. By dawn, he had restored most of its critical systems. Exhausted but satisfied, he stood back to admire his handiwork. Cethia watched him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "We're not done yet," he reminded her, wiping his brow. "But she's looking better." "Good," Cethia said, her expression resolute, "because Crike won't wait long." Maddox glanced at her, half-smirking. "I'm starting to think you like living dangerously." "Maybe," she replied, her gaze steady. "Or maybe I just don't have a choice." "Welcome to the club," he said, feeling an unexpected camaraderie with this alien pilot. But as they stood together, surrounded by the ship's faint glow and the distant hum of forgotten technology, Maddox had a feeling this was going to be one hell of a ride. The morning on the desert moon felt too still for his liking. Despite the progress made, he couldn't shake the sense of looming danger. The silence gnawed at him, and the air crackled with tension. "You really should have told me more about this Crike guy before I agreed to help," Maddox said dryly, tinkering with the ship's power relays. "I would have charged double." Cethia turned to him, her eyes sharp. "You wouldn't have come if I told you everything." "You'd be surprised what I've been willing to do for a paycheck," Maddox replied, glancing up at her. For a moment, the only sound was the whirring of machinery. Then Cethia spoke again, her voice softening. "He's after me and the ship. I don't know which he values more." Maddox paused, his curiosity piqued. "And what's so special about the ship?" She hesitated, the fluorescent cracks on her skin pulsing faintly as if reflecting her inner conflict. "It's old technology, lost even to my people. Crike thinks he can use it for things that would tear the galaxy apart." "Great," Maddox muttered, shaking his head. "So we're not just fixing a ship. We're trying to stop some lunatic from using it as a doomsday weapon." Cephia's silence confirmed his fears, and Maddox sighed. No pressure then. 3 hours later, the tension finally snapped. An alarm blared, and Maddox's head jerked up. A proximity warning blazed across the control panel. "Crike has found us," Cethia said, her voice low and steady. "Get inside now," Maddox shouted, grabbing his toolkit and racing toward the ship. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with urgency. Maddox worked furiously to bring the ship's systems online, but the interface was too alien, too complex. He needed Cethia. "Help me," he called out, urgency lacing his voice. Cethia stepped beside him, her fingers dancing over the console. To Maddox's astonishment, she seemed to have a natural connection with the ship. Lights flickered to life, and the shields hummed as they activated some of the weapon systems. "Can we fly?" Maddox asked, a mix of hope and fear in his voice. "Not yet," she replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Power is diverting." Suddenly, the ship shook violently as an energy blast hit the hull. Maddox cursed under his breath, his heart racing. "I guess Crike's not here for a friendly chat." "No," Cethia confirmed, her tone serious. "But he will be if we don't move." Maddox's fingers danced over the panels, searching for anything that could help. He felt a cold indentation near the control system. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to it. Cethia glanced at him, her eyes widening. I didn't know it was still active. Active? How? Maddox urged her. There's an AI on board, very old, but powerful, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. It's risky to wake it up. Great, just what we need, Maddox said sarcastically. But it might help us. Cethia hesitated, her expression torn. It doesn't like humans. Perfect, Maddox grumbled. Well, I think it's time we made some new friends. With resolve, Cethia pressed her hand into the control node. The ship shuddered, and a deep, echoing voice filled the cockpit. Who dares to awaken me? The A's voice was gravelly and commanding, sending chills down Maddox's spine. He couldn't resist. Just your friendly neighborhood mechanic, he quipped. Also, we're about to get shot at, so if you could help us out. Human, the AI interrupted, its voice dripping with disdain. You are unworthy of this vessel. Yeah, I got that. Maddox shot a look at Cethia. I'm guessing this is the part where it doesn't like humans. Cethia's eyes glowed as she tried to calm the AI. This human is here to help us. We need to defend the ship. Crike is close. After a long silence, the AI rumbled again. Your human hands have tainted these systems, but I will protect the vessel for now. Great. Maddox sighed in relief as the ship's weapons powered up, sleek energy turrets sliding out of hidden compartments. Glad to see you getting along. Outside, Crike's forces were closing in. Maddox felt adrenaline surge through him. Let's give these guys a warm welcome. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the ship's defensive systems, and the first blast lit up the night sky. As Maddox and Cethia watched the chaos unfold from the cockpit, the realization hit him. They were in this together now. Whatever awaited them next, they would face it side by side. The adventure was just beginning. The battle begins. The moment the ship's weapon systems roared to life, a sense of urgency filled the cockpit. Outside, the landscape of the barren moon transformed into a chaotic battleground. Energy blasts lit up the dull sky, illuminating the dark silhouettes of Crike's mercenaries as they moved in. The once silent graveyard of technology was now a cacophony of shouts and explosions, echoing across the dusty expanse. Maddox's heart raced as he took in the scene. The ship, now humming with power, felt alive beneath him. He glanced at Cethia, her eyes sharp with determination. The fluorescent green cracks in her skin pulsed brighter, as if responding to the mounting tension. Can you get us airborne? He shouted over the din of alarms and the roaring of the ship's engines. Cethia's fingers flew over the control panel, her focus unwavering. Not yet. I need to stabilize the power distribution first, she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. Maddox took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Just do what you need to do. I'll hold them off. He moved toward the cockpit's side window, peering through the thick glass at the approaching threat. Crike's forces, a mix of armored mercenaries and heavily armed vehicles, were regrouping. They were fierce and relentless, their mission clear: capture Cethia and reclaim the technology hidden within her ship. A loud crash reverberated through the hull as a barrage of energy blasts hit the ship's shields. Maddox could see the sparks flying from the hull, but the shields held firm. They're coming in hot. He called out, quickly scanning for anything he could use as a weapon. Focus on the defense systems, Cethia shouted back, her voice rising above the clamor. We need to protect ourselves until we can lift off. As he rummaged through the toolkit, Maddox spotted a small blaster tucked away. He snatched it up, checking the power cell and ensuring it was fully charged. All right, let's give them a warm welcome, he declared, feeling a rush of adrenaline course through him. Outside, the mercenaries advanced their leader, Crike, looming in the back, barking orders. Maddox's fingers tightened around the blaster as he took a defensive stance near the ship's exit ramp. He peered through the narrow opening, his heart pounding. He could see the enemy, a menacing wave of black armor and deadly intent, preparing to storm their position. "Are you ready?" he asked Cethia, who was still absorbed in her task, beads of sweat forming on her brow. "Just a little longer," she replied, her voice tinged with urgency. "Hold them off, Maddox." With a determined nod, Maddox stepped out onto the dusty surface of the moon. The air felt thick with tension, and the faint hum of the ship faded as he positioned himself behind a pile of scrap metal for cover. He took aim, his heart racing, and squeezed the trigger. A bolt of energy shot from the blaster, hitting one of the mercenaries squarely in the chest. The figure crumpled to the ground, and Maddox felt a surge of satisfaction. "Good shot," Cethia called from inside, her eyes darting between the control panels. But there was no time to celebrate. More mercenaries moved in, and Maddox knew he had to act quickly. He ducked behind cover as another volley of energy blasts flew past him, kicking up clouds of dust where they struck. The chaos of battle enveloped him, each second stretching into an eternity. "Can you get the shields back online?" he yelled over the noise. "I'm trying. Just keep them busy." Cethia shouted back, her fingers moving frantically over the controls. Maddox nodded, steeling himself. He peeked out again, targeting another mercenary who was trying to flank him. He fired, the shot finding its mark. The mercenary stumbled back, but the onslaught was relentless. More of them were coming, and he could see Crike now, a hulking figure directing his men, a fierce determination etched on his face. "Keep it together, Maddox," he muttered to himself, the blaster steady in his grip. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. They had to protect the ship, and more importantly, Cethia. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed behind him, and Maddox spun around to see the ship's rear hatch being hit. "They're breaching," he shouted, panic rising in his throat. "Focus on the front," Cethia yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'll handle the back." Maddox turned back toward the approaching mercenaries, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. He could see their numbers growing as they pushed forward, and his resolve hardened. He couldn't let them take the ship, or Cethia. Firing again, he took down another mercenary, but he could see Crike's forces starting to spread out, trying to flank him from both sides. "Cethia," he called, desperate. "We need to move now." "I'm almost there," she shouted back, sweat glistening on her brow as she worked frantically. "Just a few more minutes." Maddox glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of her working, a picture of focused determination amidst the chaos. He felt a swell of admiration. She was strong, and together, they could make it out of this. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath them as one of Crike's vehicles unleashed a powerful energy blast. Maddox stumbled, regaining his balance just in time to see a group of mercenaries charging towards him, weapons raised. With no time to think, he dove back behind cover, firing blindly over the top. Come on," he muttered under his breath, willing Cethia to hurry. He could feel the pressure mounting, the heat of the battle closing in around him. He needed to buy her time, but he could feel his energy waning. Just then, a shot rang out from the rear of the ship, and Maddox turned to see a figure emerge from the darkness, Cethia, blaster in hand. "I fuck your back," she shouted, firing at the mercenaries trying to breach the ship. Maddox's heart leaped. "Now that's what I like to see," he called out, firing alongside her. They moved as a unit, covering each other's flanks, and for the first time since the battle began, he felt a surge of hope. With their combined firepower, they pushed the mercenaries back, slowly reclaiming ground. "We can't let them get inside," Maddox shouted, determination burning in his chest. He fired again, taking out another enemy combatant. Cethia nodded, her face set in a mask of fierce concentration. "I'm ready to initiate launch procedures," she yelled, glancing at the control panel behind her. "We just need to hold them off for a bit longer." Maddox focused on the front lines again, watching as Crike's forces regrouped. He could see the anger in their eyes, the frustration mounting as they realized they were being outmaneuvered. He couldn't let them rally. "Let's give them a taste of what we've got," he shouted, moving out from behind cover. With each shot he fired, he felt more empowered, more determined to protect what they had fought so hard for. Suddenly, the ship trembled again as another energy blast slammed into its side. Maddox glanced back, worry creeping into his mind. "Cethia, can you?" "Almost done," she shouted back, her hands flying across the controls. "Just a few more seconds." He took a deep breath, pushing his fear aside. He had to keep going. "We can do this," he shouted, rallying himself as much as her. "Just a little longer." The sound of the blaster fire echoed around him, and he felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins like a drug. They were fighting for their lives, for their freedom. He could not let this moment slip away. Finally, he heard Cethia's voice rise above the chaos, filled with determination. "Now, initiating launch sequence." The ship responded with a low hum, and Maddox felt a thrill run through him. They were going to make it. But just then, Crike appeared at the edge of the skirmish, his towering figure silhouetted against the burning debris. "Get them," he roared, his voice booming like thunder. The mercenaries surged forward, and Maddox's heart sank. "No," he shouted, scrambling for the blaster again, his mind racing. They had to hold them off for just a little longer. "Get to the ship," Cethia shouted, firing at the advancing mercenaries. "We're taking off." As the last of the energy blasts rang out, Maddox sprinted back toward the ship, determination driving him forward. "Go, go, go," he shouted, racing up the ramp. He could feel the heat of battle behind him, the sounds of chaos fading as they made their escape. Inside, he quickly made his way to the controls beside Cethia. "What can I do?" he asked, breathless. "Help me stabilize the ship," she commanded, her fingers dancing over the console. "We need to get out of here before Crike catches up." Maddox nodded, doing his best to follow her instructions as the ship thrummed with energy. He could feel the power surging through the vessel, a sense of urgency palpable in the air. With one final push, Cethia activated the thrusters, and the ship jolted, lifting off the ground. "We're flying," she exclaimed, a mix of triumph and relief washing over her. As they soared into the sky, Maddox glanced back at the surface of the moon, the chaos below now a distant memory. "We did it," he shouted, unable to contain his excitement. "Not yet," Cethia cautioned, her expression serious. "Crick won't give up that easily." Maddox nodded, realizing the battle was far from over. But as they ascended into the stars, a new sense of hope filled his heart. They were alive, and together, they could face whatever lay ahead. Into the stars. As the ship soared into the void of space, the vastness enveloped them in an embrace of darkness, speckled with distant stars. Maddox felt a mix of exhilaration and relief wash over him. They had escaped the chaos of the moon, but the reality of their situation pressed heavily upon him. Crike was still out there, a relentless predator determined to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. "Status report," Maddox called out, turning to Cethia, who was still focused on the control panel. Her fingers danced over the holographic displays, data flashing before her eyes in a dizzying array of colors and figures. "Systems are stabilizing," she replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But the ship took some damage during our escape. We'll need to find a safe place to patch things up." Maddox nodded, scanning the navigation screen. They were entering an uncharted section of space, a realm dotted with asteroids and remnants of ancient battles. "How about that nearby asteroid belt?" he suggested, pointing to a cluster of floating rocks on the display. "We could use it as cover while we assess the damage." Cethia hesitated, her luminous green eyes narrowing. "It's risky. The asteroids can be unpredictable, and Crike could follow our trail." "Better than letting him know where we are," Maddox argued, feeling the weight of urgency in his chest. "We need to regroup and make a plan." With a reluctant nod, Cethia adjusted their course toward the asteroid belt. As they approached, the view outside the cockpit shifted, the vast emptiness of space becoming a swirling mass of rock and debris. Maddox felt a thrill at the prospect of navigating through such treacherous territory. It reminded him of his days piloting his own ship, racing through asteroid fields with nothing but instinct and adrenaline guiding him. "Hold on tight," he shouted as they entered the belt, the ship shaking slightly as they maneuvered around the jagged rocks. Sethia's hands flew over the controls, guiding the ship with an expertise that both impressed and relieved him. "You're a natural," Maddox said, grinning as they narrowly avoided a massive asteroid. "I'll take the rear if you want to focus on the front." "Agreed," Sethia replied, her tone lightening for the first time since their battle on the moon. As they wove through the belt, Maddox couldn't help but feel a surge of camaraderie with Sethia. They had fought side by side, and now they were navigating a dangerous obstacle course together. With each narrow escape, his respect for her grew. She was not just an alien pilot, she was a formidable ally. After several tense minutes of weaving through the rocks, they finally found a relatively safe spot nestled between two larger asteroids. "This should do," Maddox said, allowing himself a moment to breathe. "We can take a minute to assess what needs fixing." Sethia nodded, her expression turning serious once more. "We have to be quick. Crick won't give up easily, and we don't have much time." Maddox set to work, running diagnostics on the ship's systems. "The weapons are functional, but we'll need to reinforce the hull and restore power to some of the navigational systems," he said, his voice steady as he pointed out the issues on the display. As he worked, he could feel Sethia watching him. "You're good at this," she said, admiration evident in her voice. "You have a talent for fixing things." "It's what I do," he replied, a bit sheepishly. "I've always had a knack for machines. It feels good to make something work again, especially in times like these." Sethia's eyes softened as she leaned against the console, crossing her arms. "I'm grateful you came when you did. I wouldn't have made it without you." "Don't mention it," Maddox said, feeling a warmth spread through him. "We're in this together, right?" "Right," Sethia agreed, her expression serious once more. "But it's more than that. If Craig catches up with us, it won't just be about repairing the ship, it's about survival." Maddox nodded, the gravity of her words settling in. "I get it. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever he throws at us next." The two worked in tandem, Maddox taking the lead on repairs while Sethia handled the navigation systems. He couldn't help but admire her skill. Her hands moved with grace and precision, coaxing the ship's systems back to life. They exchanged occasional glances, a silent understanding growing between them. After what felt like an eternity, they finally finished the repairs. The ship hummed with renewed energy, and Maddox felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. "All done," he announced, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. "We're ready for takeoff." "Good," Sethia replied, a determined glint in her eyes. "But we need to keep our guard up. Craig will be hunting us, and we can't afford to let our guard down." "Understood," Maddox said, taking his position at the controls. "Let's get out of here and put some distance between us and that moon." With a deep breath, he initiated the launch sequence. The ship powered up, the engines roaring to life as they broke free from the asteroid field. As they ascended, the stars shone brightly around them, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. But as they settled into a stable orbit, a warning light flashed on the control panel. "What now?" Maddox muttered, eyes narrowing as he checked the readings. Sethia leaned over, her expression tense. "We're being tracked. Craig's forces are closer than I thought." "Great," Maddox said, feeling a chill creep down his spine. "What's our plan?" Sethia's mind raced as she analyzed their options. "We need to create a diversion. If we can lead them away, we might have time to regroup and plan our next move." "Sounds risky," Maddox said, weighing the possibilities. "But I'm in. What do you have in mind?" "Let's use the asteroids to our advantage," she suggested, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "If we can create enough interference in their tracking systems, we might buy ourselves some time." Maddox felt a thrill at the prospect. "Let's do it," he said, invigorated by the challenge. Cepheus' fingers flew across the controls, programming a series of maneuvers that would lead them back into the asteroid belt. "Get ready," she shouted as the ship lurched forward. As they dove back into the field, Maddox gripped the controls, his heart pounding. They weaved through the asteroids, taking sharp turns and hiding behind larger rocks. The ship shook as energy blasts whizzed past, but Maddox's focus was unbreakable. "Hold on," he yelled, pushing the ship to its limits as they narrowly avoided collisions. Cethia was right beside him, her voice a steady presence in the storm of chaos. "There, that cluster. We can hide there and create a false trail." Maddox followed her instructions, steering the ship toward a dense cluster of asteroids. They powered down the engines and nestled into a hidden alcove. The darkness of the rocks enveloped them, creating a temporary sanctuary. "Now we wait," Cethia said, her expression tense but determined. Maddox nodded, heart racing as they settled into silence. They could hear the distant sound of Crike's forces as they swept through the belt, searching for any signs of their prey. The atmosphere inside the ship was thick with tension, each second feeling like an eternity. "Do you think they'll find us?" Maddox asked, keeping his voice low. Cethia shrugged, her eyes fixed on the control panel. "If we're lucky, they'll think we moved on. But they know we're here somewhere. We have to be ready." As they sat in the dim light of the cockpit, Maddox couldn't help but glance at Cethia. The soft glow of her skin illuminated the worry etched on her face, and he felt a rush of protectiveness. "We'll figure this out," he assured her, feeling a bond grow between them. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Cethia turned to him, her eyes reflecting both fear and gratitude. "Thank you, Maddox. I don't know what I would do without you." Before he could respond, a loud thud reverberated through the ship. Maddox's heart sank as he realized they had been located. "They're onto us," he exclaimed, his mind racing. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Cethia commanded, her voice filled with urgency. Maddox nodded, his heart pounding as he braced for the oncoming storm. The ship shook again as energy blasts started to rain down around them. "Let's show them what we can do," he shouted, adrenaline fueling his determination. With a deep breath, he fired up the engines, preparing to take off again. They had faced the chaos together before, and now they would do it once more. Whatever Crike and his forces threw at them, they would fight back, with all their strength and ingenuity. As they soared into the fray, the darkness of space transformed into a battleground once more, and Maddox felt a thrill of resolve. They would not go down without a fight. Together, they would face whatever awaited them, and he knew that they would emerge stronger than shadows of the past. As the ship burst from the shadows of the asteroid belt, the darkness of space greeted Maddox and Cethia with an eerie calm. The stars twinkled like distant eyes watching their every move, and the tension from the recent battle hung thick in the air. They had narrowly escaped Crike's forces, but now a new challenge loomed ahead, navigating the uncharted territories of space without drawing attention to themselves. "Status," Maddox called, gripping the controls tightly as he scanned the sensors for any sign of pursuit. Cephia's fingers danced over the console, her expression focused. "We've got a moment of reprieve," she replied, glancing at the readouts. "Crike's forces are still sweeping the asteroid belt. They're temporarily lost." "Good," Maddox said, allowing himself a moment to breathe. "But we need to figure out where we're heading next. We can't stay in one place for too long." "Agreed," Cethia replied, her brow furrowing in thought. "I have a safe haven in mind, a small outpost on the edge of the Garan sector. It's off the beaten path, and we should be able to rest and regroup there." Maddox raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You know a place like that?" "It's a hidden refuge for those who need to stay off the radar. I used to go there as a child with my family," Cethia said, her voice softening at the memory. "It's remote, but I trust the people there." "Then let's set a course," Maddox said, feeling a flicker of hope. It'll give us time to think and prepare. As they punched in the coordinates, the ship's engines hummed to life, and they leaped into hyperspace. The familiar sights of stars streaking by created a fleeting sense of comfort. Maddox leaned back in his seat, the adrenaline from the previous battle starting to ebb away, replaced by a feeling of exhaustion. "Want to take a break?" he asked, glancing over at Cethia, who was still studying the navigation readouts intently. "Not yet," she replied, her eyes locked on the data. "I want to be sure we're in the clear before I allow myself to relax. Crike is cunning. He won't give up easily." Maddox nodded, understanding her urgency. They had only just begun to uncover the depths of their predicament, but a lingering thought nagged at him. "You mentioned your family. What happened to them?" he asked carefully, wanting to know more about her past. Cethia's expression shifted, shadows flickering in her eyes. "They disappeared when I was a child," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were on a trade mission, and our ship was attacked. I was the only one who made it back. Ever since then, I've learned to survive on my own." Maddox's heart ached for her. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "That must have been incredibly hard." She took a deep breath, collecting herself. "It was," she admitted, her tone firming, "but it made me who I am. I've learned to fight and to trust my instincts, and I refuse to let anyone else take what little I have left." Her resolve struck a chord with Maddox, igniting a fire within him. "Then we'll fight together," he said, a fierce determination lighting up his voice. "Craig won't take anything from you. We'll protect each other." Cethia looked at him, a spark of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Maddox. It means more than you know." The ship hummed steadily through the stars, and as they continued their journey, Maddox found himself increasingly fascinated by Cethia. She was more than just a pilot. She was a survivor, a warrior with a past that shaped her every decision. He admired her strength and resilience. As the hours passed, they shared stories of their lives. Maddox talked about his adventures across the galaxy, the crazy jolts he had taken, and the strange places he had visited. Cethia listened, her expression softening as she learned about his world. "I never thought I would meet a human mechanic out here, let alone one so skilled," she said, a smile breaking through her earlier seriousness. "Your stories remind me that not all humans are ruthless scavengers." "Hey, we have our good apples," Maddox replied, chuckling. "Even in the galaxy's depths, you'll find some gems among the junk." Cethia laughed, and for a moment, the weight of their situation felt lighter. The bond between them deepened as they shared laughter and stories, and Maddox realized how important this connection had become in the midst of chaos. But as they drew closer to the outpost, a sense of foreboding crept back into the cockpit. "What if Crike finds us?" Maddox asked, his voice lowering. "Do you think he has a way to track us?" Cethia's expression hardened. "He's resourceful. He might have planted tracking devices on his mercenaries. If they're close, he could detect us even from afar." Maddox's mind raced. "Then we'll need to be cautious. We can't let him know we're coming." As they approached the coordinates for the outpost, Maddox felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The stars began to shift, revealing a small, unremarkable rock floating silently in the darkness. "Is that it?" he asked, squinting at the view screen. Cethia nodded. "It may look insignificant, but it's well hidden. The locals have set up cloaking technology to keep it off standard scanners." Maddox brought the ship closer, expertly navigating to a landing pad nestled against the rocky surface. The ship settled with a gentle thud, and they exchanged a look of determination. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," Cethia replied, her voice steady. They disembarked, stepping onto the surface of the outpost. The air was cool and carried the scent of distant minerals. Before them stood a cluster of structures made from rough-hewn rock, blending seamlessly into the landscape. A handful of locals moved about, their faces obscured by hoods and cloaks. Maddox followed Cethia as she led the way through the winding paths of the outpost. "These are good people," she assured him. "They understand what it means to be on the run. they won't betray us. As they entered a dimly lit common area, the atmosphere shifted. The chatter of voices fell silent as the locals turned to regard them, suspicion etched on their faces. But Cethia stepped forward confidently, her demeanor demanding respect. "I am Cethia," she announced, her voice steady. "I come in peace and in need of refuge." One of the elders stepped forward, his face weathered and lined with age. "Cethia, it has been years since we last saw you," he said, his voice rough but warm. "We thought you had perished with your family." "I survived," Cethia replied, her expression resolute. "But now I require your help. There are forces hunting me, and I cannot face them alone." The elder nodded, understanding passing through his eyes. "You are always welcome here. We will help you." He gestured to a table where food and drink were laid out. "You must rest and regain your strength." As Maddox and Cethia sat at the table, a feeling of comfort washed over him. The atmosphere of the outpost was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. He watched as Cethia engaged with the locals, her face lighting up with each shared memory and story. Maddox felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in a while, he could imagine a future beyond the immediate danger. "This place feels safe," he said, leaning closer to Cethia. "I'm glad we found it." "It's not just safe, it's home," Cethia replied, her eyes shining with emotion. "This is where I learned to survive, where I became who I am today." As the evening wore on, the tension of their recent struggles began to fade. They shared stories, laughter echoing through the common area as the locals welcomed them. Maddox couldn't help but feel that they had found a moment of peace in the storm, a temporary reprieve from the chaos of the galaxy. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't last. Craig was still out there, hunting for them, and they would have to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The elder approached them once more, a grave expression settling on his features. "Cethia, we have heard whispers of Craig's movements. He is ruthless and will stop at nothing to achieve his goals. We must come up with a plan." Cethia's demeanor shifted as she nodded in agreement. "I want to confront him, to end this once and for all." Maddox felt a surge of resolve. "I'll stand by you, no matter what. We can't let him take anything from you again." The elder looked between them, seeing the strength in their bond. "Then we shall prepare," he said, his voice steady. "We will give you the tools you need to defend yourselves, and we will ensure that you are not alone in this fight." As they gathered around the table, strategies and ideas flowed like the refreshments before them. Maddox and Cethia joined forces with the locals, sharing knowledge and skills. Together, they crafted a plan to turn the tide against Craig. Maddox felt a sense of purpose wash over him, a fierce determination igniting in his heart. They would not back down. Together, they would face the darkness and fight for their future. The gathering storm. The outpost buzzed with activity as Cethia, Maddox, and the locals began to prepare for the confrontation that loomed on the horizon. The camaraderie they had built over the past few hours transformed into a palpable sense of determination. With every passing moment, the weight of their upcoming battle settled heavily on Maddox's shoulders, but so did a growing confidence in their shared strength. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the rocky landscape, Cethia gathered everyone in the central courtyard. "Thank you all for welcoming us," she began, her voice steady and clear. "We come not just as fugitives, but as allies. Craig poses a threat to all of us, and together we can stand against him." The locals nodded, their faces a mixture of resolve and concern. Maddox stood beside Cethia, feeling the intensity of the moment. He could see the determination in her eyes, a fire ignited by the prospect of reclaiming her past and protecting her future. "First, we need to gather information," Maddox said, stepping forward. "Craig is dangerous, but he's also arrogant. If we can find out what he's planning, we can turn his own strategies against him." One of the elders, a woman with deep-set eyes and silver hair, spoke up. "We have eyes and ears across the sector. I can send word to our allies in nearby colonies. They may have intel on Craig's movements." Sethia nodded. Thank you. Every bit of information we can gather will help us. Maddox felt a surge of adrenaline. While you do that, we should fortify the outpost. If Crike catches wind of our plans, he'll come for us and we need to be ready. The locals sprang into action, gathering supplies and preparing defensive measures. Maddox watched as Sethia directed a group of engineers, discussing tactics and strategies with an ease that showcased her leadership qualities. He was impressed by how she took charge, her confidence radiating through the crowd. As night enveloped the outpost, the atmosphere shifted from tense anticipation to focused determination. Maddox worked alongside the locals, reinforcing the barricades and setting up makeshift defenses. He felt a sense of purpose, a feeling that he was finally making a difference. As he hammered nails into the wooden barricades, Maddox caught a glimpse of Sethia in the corner of his eye, surrounded by a group of local engineers. They were poring over blueprints of the outpost, discussing escape routes and tactical advantages. He felt a warmth spread through him at the sight. She was a natural leader, and her strength inspired him to push harder. "Hey," he called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do you need any extra hands?" Sethia looked up, her expression softening. "Actually, yes. We need someone to scout the perimeter. Can you check for any signs of Crike's forces? We need to know how much time we have." "Consider it done," Maddox replied, feeling a rush of excitement. The chance to gather intelligence felt like a mission he could finally sink his teeth into. He gathered his gear, making sure he had a blaster and a few tools in case he needed to improvise. "I'll be back soon," he promised Sethia, who watched him with a mixture of concern and encouragement. "Stay safe, Maddox," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "We can't afford to lose anyone now." With a nod, Maddox stepped out of the outpost and into the cool night air. The moonlight illuminated the rocky terrain, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the ground. He felt the weight of the quiet surrounding him, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of the outpost. As he moved along the perimeter, Maddox kept his senses sharp, listening for any unusual sounds. The stillness of the night was almost comforting, but he knew better than to let his guard down. He had faced dangers before, and this was no different. After several minutes of cautious scouting, he reached a vantage point overlooking the landscape. From here, he could see the distant glow of a settlement on the horizon, flickering lights that indicated life. But beneath those lights, he sensed a hidden tension. He focused, scanning the area with his binoculars. Shadows flitted among the rocks, figures moving with purpose. Maddox's heart raced as he realized that Crike's forces were closer than they had anticipated. They were likely scouting the area, searching for signs of Sethia and the outpost. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, the reality of their situation hitting him hard. He needed to get back and warn Sethia. They were running out of time. With urgency fueling his movements, Maddox retraced his steps, moving quickly but quietly through the rocky terrain. The outpost came into view, and he sprinted toward it, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He burst through the entrance, breathless and alarmed. "Sethia," he called out, his voice echoing in the courtyard. The locals looked up, their expressions shifting to concern. "What's wrong?" Sethia asked, stepping forward with a worried look. "I spotted Crike's men," Maddox replied, trying to catch his breath. "They're scouting the perimeter. We need to prepare, he's not far behind." Panic rippled through the crowd as the news sank in. Sethia's expression hardened, her determination returning. "We need to fortify the defenses. Everyone, back to your stations." The locals sprang into action, moving with purpose as they reinforced barricades and readied weapons. Maddox felt a sense of urgency as he grabbed a nearby blaster, feeling its weight settle into his hands. "What's our plan?" he asked Sethia, his heart racing. "We prepare for an ambush," she replied, her eyes fierce with resolve. "If we can lure them into a vulnerable position, we'll have the upper hand. We need to draw them in and strike before they realize what's happening." Maddox nodded, impressed by her strategy. How can I help? Get to the east barricade and set up traps. Use anything you can find, explosives, debris, anything that can slow them down, she instructed, already moving to coordinate with the others. On it, Maddox shouted, racing to the designated area. The adrenaline surged through him, amplifying his focus. He set to work, stacking debris and rigging traps with the locals, their shared energy fueling his determination. As they worked, Maddox couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in his gut. He knew Crike would come for them. It was only a matter of time. We're ready, he thought, gripping the blaster tightly. Just stay focused. The atmosphere thickened with anticipation as the night wore on. Maddox took a moment to catch his breath, glancing at the sky. Stars twinkled above, indifferent to the chaos brewing below. Stay sharp. Sethia's voice broke through his thoughts, and he turned to see her rallying the locals. We'll stand together. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who's been oppressed by Craig and his mercenaries. Cheers erupted from the gathered crowd, the energy infectious. Maddox felt his heart swell with pride. They were more than just a group of survivors. They were a unified front, ready to fight for their freedom. Then the distant sound of engines reached his ears, a low, rumbling growl that sent a chill down his spine. They're here, he shouted, his voice rising above the commotion. Take your positions, Sethia commanded, her voice fierce and unwavering. We need to be ready. Maddox took his place at the barricade, feeling the weight of the moment settle upon him. The adrenaline coursed through him as he gripped the blaster, peering through the darkness for any sign of the enemy. As the first of Craig's forces crested the ridge, Maddox's heart pounded in his chest. This is it, he thought. We're going to show them what we're made of. The mercenaries moved in, their silhouettes stark against the night sky. They were equipped with advanced weaponry, scanning the area with a precision that sent a shiver down Maddox's spine. But he wouldn't let fear overtake him. Now, Sethia shouted, and with that command, chaos erupted. Maddox opened fire, the blaster humming as energy bolts flew through the air, striking their targets with precision. The locals joined him, a chorus of determination ringing out as they defended their home. The battle unfolded in a whirlwind of chaos and noise. Maddox's senses sharpened as he focused on the enemy, adrenaline driving him forward. He felt the heat of energy blasts nearby, the ground shaking with the impact of explosions. Hold the line, Sethia called out, her voice a beacon amidst the chaos. Maddox could see her fighting fiercely, her skills evident as she dispatched enemy after enemy. In that moment, everything clicked into place. They were fighting not just for their survival, but for a chance to reclaim their lives, their home. With every shot he fired, Maddox felt a deep sense of purpose. They wouldn't back down. As the battle raged on, Maddox caught sight of Crike himself in the distance, a formidable presence amid his men. There's the bastard, he muttered under his breath, his resolve hardening. Sethia seemed to sense his focus. Maddox, keep an eye on Crike. If we can take him out, the rest will falter. With determination, Maddox adjusted his aim, preparing to fire. But just as he steadied his breath, a nearby explosion rocked the ground, sending debris flying. He stumbled back, losing sight of Crike in the chaos. Get up, he heard Sethia shout, urgency lacing her tone. We can't let him escape. Maddox pushed himself up, adrenaline surging as he scanned the battlefield. The tide of the fight was shifting, and he could feel the weight of their mission pressing upon him. They had to win. Focus, he told himself, regaining his composure. He spotted Crike re-emerging from the smoke, barking orders at his men. You won't get away this time, Maddox vowed, gripping the blaster tightly. Taking aim again, he squeezed the trigger, sending a bolt of energy toward Crike. It struck true, but the mercenary leader shrugged it off, grinning like a madman. You think you can defeat me? Crike boomed, his voice echoing across the battlefield. With renewed determination, Maddox prepared to fire again, but the chaos of battle swirled around him. He knew this fight wasn't just about him. It was about everyone they fought for. He felt the weight of their hopes resting on his shoulders. "Keep pushing," he shouted, rallying the locals around him. "We can do this, together." As the battle continued, Maddox fought alongside Cethia and the locals, a unified front against Craig's mercenaries. The fight felt eternal, but every moment only fueled their resolve. They would protect their home, no matter the cost. In the heart of the storm, Maddox realized that they were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a future free from oppression, and as long as they stood together, they had a chance.